Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of the Web of Conspiracy. I am your host, Adam Webb. It is great to be back with you this Friday. Um, Back at a normal time slot here this week. Uh, just a few things here, real quick, I wanted to touch on. First off, I wanted to thank everybody for their support of the show thus far. Since moving over to this new platform, I've actually done surprisingly better than I had anticipated. Um, so I'm very, very, very happy with the success that the show is having up to this point, and I look to be able to kind of take this further and expand a little bit more, and hopefully gain even a bigger audience than what I've already got so far. So all in all, I just I'm very pleased with the way that the show is going up to this point. So I owe that to everybody out there who takes the time to listen to the show. So thank you very much for that. I do appreciate it. A few other little things and tidbits here. I've got I think a couple more emails to finish up back to some listeners, and then I think I'll be all caught up on all that. So hang in there. I've got. Basically a few of the things that I'm working on and suddenly developing some things for the website as well. I'm thinking about putting a forum on the website. So I kind of like to get some feedback from some of you listen. I know there's a lot of you know forums, sites and forums dedicated to the unknown and the paranormal and all that. So I realized that this isn't going to be a kind of reinventing the wheel, but I kind of thought it would be interesting to be able to do something like that on the website for the show, simply because of the approach that I like to take with it. And I want to try to encourage a more open debate between those who maybe are more skeptical and those who are more on the believer side of things. And I kind of wanted to bring those, put a place together where we can both those worlds come together and be able to discuss some of these things civilly. Um, so that's sort of something I'm kicking around doing. I'm looking at a few different options, a few different places that can offer the forums that I can embed into the website, trying to find what I think would be a good fit. But I would certainly love to get some feedback from the listeners as to whether or not that'd be something that you would be interested in looking at and participating in, because a forum isn't worthwhile if the people, the audience is intended for, don't use it and don't chat and don't actively participate. So I don't want to put something out there that is going to be a bit of a waste of time either. So I'd love to get some feedback from everybody on that as well. Um, in case you haven't been following this far, I always like to take time to try to promote the social media for the site and for the show. I've got Facebook page, Twitter page, Google Plus. I like to try to post updates, either a day before or, today. I don't think I got in there until a few hours before the show, just as a reminder. So I try to post some things on there. I haven't been as active as of late, but you know, transitioning the show over here and doing some things here has been a little bit more time consuming. So um, with that being said, bear with me, but I do intend to be a little more active on the social media platforms for the show as well. Um, okay, so normally, for every show, I like to kind of discuss some tidbits and news items, and today I don't really know that I have a lot of time to get into that. So for those of you who really look forward to that, I apologize in advance. But this is Friday the 13th after all, right? So, this is the day of disappointment, the day of bad luck, so to speak, right? Well, at least that's how the superstition goes. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, it seems to be that most historians attribute Friday the 13th in most Western societies being unlucky, given that it's a reference to um, the biblical use of the number 12, and that the 13 seems to be like an abomination of that. And of course, Friday is deemed as an unlucky day, going back to the old days of Christianity, because that's the day that Judas betrayed Jesus. So much of this idea of Friday the 13th being unlucky stems from a lot of the old Christian beliefs. Um, at any rate, I hope everybody out there is avoiding ladders and all that good stuff, and don't break any mirrors or anything like that today. Um, the main topic that I really want to talk about, and I could really do a much larger show on this as well, but the main topic I want to talk to everybody about today, it's been something that's sort of been, um, I don't know, more frequently noticed over the last few years and certainly discussed, and that's these mysterious sounds. When I say mysterious sounds, there's quite a few different types. There's places throughout the world that are hearing these loud, almost like trumpet type sounds, or almost sounds like metal grinding on metal, very loud that can be heard for a large group of area. And there's other people who report hearing these mysterious booms like cannons, and often it's not attributed to aircraft or anything like that. It's just these mysterious booms that many people witness and often report to authorities, and there doesn't seem to be a real explanation as to what these are. And the other one that seems to be a little more common, and this has been, I guess, going back a little further, these mysterious hums, these humming sounds, um, particularly in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Right now, it's come known as the Windsor hum. Now, I do believe that there's some speculation that perhaps that is attributed to schooling of fish making this humming during mating. So it's possible that there could be an explanation as to what's maybe going on with the Windsor hum and some of these others. But Taos, New Mexico, Bristol, England, Largs, Scotland, all experiencing these similar types of hums, and that not everybody can hear. There's a small group of people, and I believe from one estimate, about 2% of the people that live in these areas can actually hear it. So it doesn't seem like whatever this hum is that's going on is operating. It's on a frequency that not everybody can hear. Um, Needless to say, for those who can hear it, it's very disturbing and it's a very uncomfortable sound. Um, but what I'm going to focus on for most of the show, because I really have to narrow it down, because I could talk a lot about this, are these trumpet-like sounds. Um, and this has seemed to have caught on. Now, in my research, I found that the earliest report that I could find, and there could be some earlier ones, just trying to sift through, it's not always the easiest. I found an earliest report going back to 2009. Now that date may seem okay, well, it's not that old. Well, but it's important, and I'll get to that in a minute. Why 2009 is important. Um, there's a number of questions that we have to go into asking about any of this type of phenomenon, it's particularly these trumpet sounds. Um, and the first question is this real or is this a hoax? Now, I can assure you that you can go onto YouTube and you can find hundreds of YouTube clips uh, that purport to be these trumpet sounds that people are randomly hearing. And just like anything else in the field of the unknown or the unexplained, you have your hoaxers, the guy that dresses up like Sasquatch, the people who use CG effects in their computer to create UFOs and videos. So there's always hoaxers. And most, I think, of what you're going to find on YouTube is not legit. However, there have been a few, and the Huffington Post had an interesting article that pointed out a couple of these, and I'm actually going to play the sounds for you today. Um, so you have to bear with. Each of them is a little over a minute long, but it's important, I think, that you kind of for those of you who aren't familiar with this, you'll see why it's catching a lot of people's attention because it's not something that can be easily ignored. Um, the reason that 2009 is important is because many of the hoaxes that have been deemed as hoax on YouTube and people who have said, "Oh yeah, we faked this," stem from 2011. And in that particular year, a movie called Red State premiered very early. It was in January of that year. Uh, and it's sort of to give you a rough little tidbit of what it was. This movie was directed and written by Kevin Smith, and this movie detailed this group of religious fundamentalists that were in this particular scene. They have this showdown with the FBI, and they're waiting for the coming of Jesus, and they hear this what sounds like these loud trumpets, and they really weren't sure what it was, and they thought, oh well, this is Jesus coming to save us, and so they escape their compound, they walk out, and they wind up subsequently being detained, and as it turns out later, these trumpet sounds they were hearing were the neighbors who were upset with them um, using this siren that they got from this old firehouse blaring it in their direction, and it just so happened that they randomly did this at that same time. And that sound they used sounded much like some of these that you hear on YouTube. So that's why a lot of it's attributed to this movie. But I can tell you there's a few that are a little different, and I've got a couple that I think are a little bit different. and aren't quite like that, and at least seem to be from people who really do genuinely claim to have heard this phenomenon and claim that it's real. Now, this phenomenon is occurring all over the world. However, it does seem to be very centrally located in a few different places, Canada being one of those places. So the next, I'm going to play two clips for you. This first clip was recorded in British Columbia, and just take a listen, a little over a minute long, uh, and then I'll play the other clip there shortly. Now that's the first clip there. Now, obviously, you can tell why those are people who do claim to actually hear this, why it's so bothersome. Almost the effect of the fingernails on the chalkboard for some people. Now, to hear that, you can sort of hear, well, maybe perhaps there is something of it like an old siren in this, and that certainly seems to be a possibility. But for those, otherwise that it seems that they can't determine a central location. It's difficult to tell if it's coming from above or coming from below. Um, but needless to say, this kind of phenomenon, hearing this, would definitely get your attention. Now, the second clip, this one, and since you don't have any video with this, I'm just playing this audio. I have to tell you, the first one took place in a urban setting, so perhaps someone could have been there with a siren, something along those lines, and people just not have known who was filming it. They may not didn't realize that was what was happening. This next clip took place and appears to be out in the middle of the wilderness in Alberta, Canada. Um, so it seems to take away at least some of the likelihood that it could be somebody with a siren. And it sounds a little bit different as well. It's about as long, so I'll play this for you here and let you listen to this. Okay, so that one, of course, you can tell sounds a little bit different than the other one. What I find most interesting is that right before those sounds at least begin to erupt that we can hear, you hear what sounds like a bunch of birds, a bunch of wildlife kind of moving out of there. Whatever this noise was, it was loud enough to disturb them. Now, this, as I said before, this was in a very rural wilderness setting. And this video seems to be at least one that many genuinely believe that this is more legit, or at least seems to have some legitimacy to it. Um, So obviously, yeah, you can understand for those of you who are not familiar with this or never heard this before, why it would get attention. Now, for many people, the question becomes: is this a natural phenomenon or is this a supernatural phenomenon? Is this something that the Earth? Is this something that's some kind of part of byproduct of an Earth process? Well, there are many of those. At least there are some scientists that say that well, this is a result of electromagnetic waves from the aurora and the radiation belt. And if you could think about it, given that the bulk of these things, these legitimate sounds, are coming from areas where the aurora would be more prominent, such as Canada. So you begin to think, well, perhaps there is an element of truth to this. That perhaps that is the true reason. Yet many people argue, well, wait a minute. When I hear this, it sounds like it's coming from all around. And maybe perhaps it's coming from the earth. Maybe this is an earth process. This is some sort of sound coming from an earthquake or things occurring below because of the almost sounding like metal grinding, right? As if though there's something grinding below and it's emanating out and above. So there seems to be some, from those who claim to have heard this, some differences in the way the sound appears to them. Now, a lot of it, of course, could have to do with the way the sound travels. It could be bouncing from around and above and below, and so it would be very difficult to discern exactly where this is coming from, depending upon your location. Um, but as I stated, that particular last piece, the one in Alberta, seems to be one of the more accepted possibilities of one that is actually true. As I said, you can go onto YouTube and there's a few, and there's even some that are openly doing this is fake. This is we just faked this. And by all means, I think that most of what you would find out there are actually fakes. But there does seem to be some shred of truth in all this. Um, as I said before, it's no different than hoaxers that have hoaxed these other things and this other phenomena that we've discussed. Yet there's always a handful that, okay, something's going on here. So there are some possible natural explanations to this phenomenon, and I'm not an expert. So I take the information that's out there and I think, okay, well, okay, that's certainly a possibility. Yet there also are others who listen to this and they hear something else. Those who are very fundamentalist Christians will listen to this and think, okay, I know what that is. That's the sound of the trumpets sounding that are described in the Book of Revelation. That's the warning. That's the sign of Armageddon coming. And there are many of those who that's what the very first thing that comes to their head when they hear that, particularly that clip in Alberta, Canada. It does seem to have almost a very trumpet type quality. I'll play a little bit for you again here, and you can listen. Now, you can imagine how, if you are of the belief that it literally happened as it's described in the Book of Revelation, hearing a sound like that, it sounds as if though there's this trumpet from the heavens, this loud booming sound. Um, so, okay, maybe there's something to that as possible as well. I mean, it's certainly unusual, and I can tell you that I had come across this phenomenon about a year ago, and I've treated it very skeptically, as I do with most of this material. But um, to me, there's something different about all this. Okay, so yes, I've discussed the possibility. Many believe that this is actually the trumpets from the Book of Revelation. That's the warning sign of the apocalypse, that Armageddon is coming and we're in the end times. There are others who hear this and think, well, obviously these are UFOs. This is sounds that are emanating from extraterrestrials, from UFOs. This is sounds that their craft are making that we can't see, that they're cloaking, but it's sounds that their craft are making, and we're able to hear it. Um, and okay, well, that's an interesting theory as well, but there's little to back up whether or not that's true or not. But it's interesting speculation that perhaps these mysterious sounds are some sort of sound created by these crafts maybe entering or leaving, our atmosphere, or perhaps if they're interdimensional beings, as we've discussed before, perhaps this is some sort of sound made by these crafts that are uh, leaving or entering our dimensional space and creating that type of strange sound. Um, Interesting theory, but as I've said before with a lot of things that we've discussed here, there's just not a whole lot to back up the actual data. There's no proof to back it up. It's just a thought. It's more or less just a theory. Um, one of these other theories, this third theory in terms of a perhaps supernatural explanation or an unnatural explanation, this one I find even more compelling. Um, and that's one I've discussed on my old show. I haven't really, gotten into a whole lot here on this show, but it's HARP. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with HARP, it's the high frequency oral project that's being done um, in Alaska, and where they're essentially trying to manipulate our ionosphere by blasting concentrated energy into their ionosphere. Many believe that HARP is responsible for controlling weather patterns, controlling perhaps earthquakes, being able to manipulate nature. And given that these recordings that I've given you today are both from Canada, it leads a little more possible credence to the idea that perhaps this is some sort of HARP manipulation, and the individuals in Canada were able to hear the ionosphere being manipulated by HARP. Now that I find very intriguing. And perhaps I would give in that certainly I'm one maybe to give it a little more credence than the idea of an extraterrestrial or a UFO craft making that kind of noise. If HARP is, and there's been much debate as to whether or not it's still functioning, but it would appear to be that it is. And there are HARPs scattered throughout the globe, so it's not just in Alaska. And that would give some credence as to why some of these other areas across the world, including the Caribbean, which there's speculated to be one in the Caribbean, and there's been reported sounds like this recorded in the Caribbean as well. So perhaps there is something to this HARP project and their manipulation of the ionosphere, creating this sound. Perhaps that is the true explanation as to what's going on. Um, I don't know. As much as what I cover on this show and what I study and what I research and the things that I come across, um, this subject has been one of the more tricky ones for me in terms of where do I where do I fall? What camp do I believe this is? Do I believe that this is natural phenomenon? Do I believe that this is all just hoax? And there are many who could put forth a valid argument that this whole thing is just hoaxed and that every one of these videos is not legitimate. Um, I'm not sure that that's the case. As I've said earlier, and I say again, I think that there is legitimate experiences happening to people across the globe. I think it's a very small number, much like the hum that I had spoke about earlier, and these mysterious booms that are being heard, particularly I believe in Kentucky. There's been a lot of reports of it. Um, so I think there's something happening. The question then at that point becomes, is it natural or is it supernatural? Or is it unnatural in the case of HARP? Well, I find the HARP theory very intriguing, obviously. I've discussed it before, and I'll certainly come back around to probably doing a whole other show on it again here going into next year. But needless to say, I think the idea that our manipulating the ionosphere may have tremendous impacts that we are not completely and fully aware of. And what we do there may cause these types of unusual sounds, particularly these trumpeting type sounds that are being heard in areas close to HARP installations. So I would tend to think that HARP certainly would be a strong possibility in terms of an unnatural phenomenon. And it would be remiss of me to completely dismiss the possibility of this being some sort of supernatural phenomenon in terms of, well, maybe there is something to the idea of these being the trumpets of Revelation. Um, I spent a number of years, studying Book of Revelation, particularly as a youngster, um, I'm not sure that everything that occurs, or at least is told as occurring, is as literal as it can be taken. But for those who read that and take it literally, it's hard not to hear that. It's hard not to hear those sounds and not hear that. I think a lot of it has to do with your perspective. And if you're one who delved into the idea of end times prophecy, then this by all means will captivate your attention because it sounds like this. And if you listen to it on like a stereo system or something like that, the effect is tremendous. The bass, everything. It's a very powerful sound. Um, so it's not one that you can just simply shrug off. And for those who do claim that they've had these legitimate experiences, they they can't shrug it off, and it's not something that it's easily forgotten. Uh, so could this be some sort of sign? Well, maybe. I'm not sure. There's another part of me that tends to think that perhaps really what we're dealing with here, though, is really something more natural that we're just not really that familiar with. Um, there's much of our world, our own human body, the world, the universe, everything that we just do not understand. We don't know everything. We don't understand everything. And the moment that we think we do, we find out that we don't. So the idea that there is some sort of process occurring either in the atmosphere or in the ground, below us, or perhaps, this truly is a sound emanating from electromagnetic waves. Um, Perhaps this is really ultimately the answer to what's going on, and one that we're just not familiar with. I believe many people, the term that's been circulating out, around the internet, they call them skyquakes, because it sounds like it's, sometimes coming from the sky. It's like these loud eruptions coming from the sky, and it's not attributed to aircraft or anything like that. So maybe this is just a natural phenomenon that we're not familiar with. It's hard to say. And I welcome feedback from those of you, weigh in, let me know. Post on Facebook, Twitter. What do you think? Do you think this phenomenon is natural, unnatural, supernatural? I'd love to get some feedback and kind of get an idea what other people think, especially from those maybe who haven't heard this before. From those I've talked to, this isn't one that's all that familiar. Those who browse YouTube on a regular basis, they've come across them, but as I said, I think much of what's there, you can't really take that as anything more than a hoax. But there is some out there. So, okay. All right. Well, that's what I've got for everybody today. Now, next week, I will be on the air. I have another show planned for you next week. Now, the week after that, the week of the Christmas, on the 27th, I will not be doing a show that week. I will be taking that week off to enjoy the holiday and spend some time with family and friends. So I won't be with you that week. However, next week, I have a special Christmas episode planned for the show. Now, I know what you're thinking. What can be paranormal, unknown, unexplained with Christmas? Well, there's actually a number of interesting legends. And one in particular that I'll get into would be Krampus. And for those of you who are, maybe study old history, or at least old Christmas traditions, you'll be a little familiar with Krampus. So I'll get into a little bit of that then next Friday. So uh, in the meantime, check out the show's website, get on the social media pages. I'd love to get your feedback on what you think about the show, as well as what you think these mysterious sounds are. Once again, I'm uncertain, so I would love to get some feedback and find out what everybody else thinks. So, all right, until next Friday, have a good one.